First up, though, let's talk to Andrew Fox. He's a defence expert, former major in the Parachute Regiment and now a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. And having been in Gaza very recently, embedded with the Gaza humanitarian programme, he has now hot-footed it to Kyiv in Ukraine and joins us live from there right now. A very good and hopefully safe afternoon to you.
Hi, Julia. Yeah, only a couple of missile attacks since I've been here, so it's been relatively quiet.
He just casually throws that in, doesn't he? But that's the reality of life in Ukraine. It's amazing the people who march on the streets, the people of Gaza, but not remotely concerned about women and children being killed in attacks on civilians in Ukraine. Let's ask you, what do you make of this meeting coming up in Alaska, the summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump? What do you think is going to happen? Who do you trust? Who don't you trust, if any?
I'm just checking my connection's okay and you can hear me.
Yeah, absolutely fine. Carry on.
Cool. Yeah, so it's a really interesting atmosphere out here at the moment. The kind of war is everywhere. You see military vehicles on the roads. You see, the memorials to the dead, which are just astonishing in terms of the sheer numbers of people that have died in this war. It's well over 1 million people now. And I think
no, 1 second. 1 million people have died in the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, on both sides. On both sides.
Those aren't the official figures I've seen.
That's what they're briefing to me anyway. Off this kind of, it's an astonishing number of people. But
I thought that was casualties. It included wounded.
Yeah. Sorry, shouting over my shoulder. Yeah, it is casualties. My bad. But the point is, Russia are absolutely not a faithful interlocutor here. They're not a trustworthy partner. They're not a side in this war that has behaved in any trustworthy manner. They've adhered to none of the laws of armed conflict. They've abducted tens of thousands of children to be re-educated in Russian indoctrination camps and resettled with Russian families. There are 1.6 million children currently under Russian occupation in the south of the country. This is and to be for the injured country to be locked out of negotiations whilst Trump speaks to Putin directly in Alaska, when frankly he should be arresting him in Alaska.
We were doing okay with the connection. It's just failed us, but we'll hopefully be able to get it back up. I mean, this makes a very point. I mean, Vladimir Putin, Philip Ingram, is an indicted war criminal for numerous acts. I mean, we know that the use of the targeting of civilians, deliberate targeting of civilians, not targeting, like the idea targeting Hamas, and they deliberately used civilians as human shields, but the abduction of children, the most outrageous, very well documented, the most outrageous act of war, the use of rape as a weapon of war as well, and that's been well documented as well in Ukraine. Outrageous. I think we have got Andrew back. Andrew, you were saying, you should be arresting him. That's one of the reasons why, of course, Vladimir Putin can't come on European territory, because he would face arrest. But in terms of, we've got Zelensky. He's been in Berlin. He's been on these Zoom calls with the Coalition of the Willing. He's met with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, in Downing Street this morning. What are his best hopes for this meeting? Because a lot of concern that that Vladimir Putin will play and string Donald Trump along, and Donald Trump will basically offer anything for peace at any price, so he can claim he's brought peace. So what's Zelensky's best hopes?
Well, I think his worst hope, as you say, is a sort of Yalta conference where Ukraine is divvied up without Ukraine having any say in the matter. At the moment, I think the best outcome for this negotiation with Trump is that there is no agreement, quite frankly. I don't think there is a good outcome from this conference, and it needs to be on Ukraine's terms, because they are the injured party who are valiantly defending their national sovereignty and their borders. And if Ukraine don't get a say in the matter, then that's the end of it, as far as I'm concerned.
And that seems to be the view of the European leaders, saying he should be at the table. Donald Trump has said that in future meetings he can be at the table. But Donald Trump has changed his tune in terms of, there was this 50 days until a ceasefire, or, all hell's going to break loose in terms of economic sanctions, and in particular these sort of secondary sanctions on countries like India, possibly China, who are buying up the oil and the gas that is giving them money to Vladimir Putin to fund his war effort in Ukraine. But then he's kind of backtracked, and now it's a listening exercise. But Steve Witkoff, his envoy, has already gone to Moscow and listened, and apparently not taken notes and been a bit confused. But a man who doesn't even know where Ukraine, where Crimea is, and thinks it's in the Donbass region, a bit of a worry. But what is the purpose of a listening exercise with Vladimir Putin?
I mean, I think it's presentational. You know, we know that Trump's priority is Trump. The outcome of this war is not something that I think he loses any sleep over. And if we look at the previous deals he's made around the world, this is one of the worst negotiators in the history of foreign affairs. You know, he is absolutely dreadful at making deals on the international stage. He will no doubt try and make a deal with with Putin, which will offer Putin outrageously good terms. But I think the bottom line is Putin is not going to stop until he gets regime change in Kyiv.
Yeah.
And until he achieves that and finds, you know, a president for Ukraine who is Moscow facing rather than Western facing, he's not achieved his war goals. He's turned his economy inside out. He's killed thousands and thousands of people and has achieved nothing. So I think anything short of regime change in Kyiv is unacceptable to Putin. Which means that Mr. Trump is wasting his time, unless he is, as you say, prepared to hammer Russia with the sanctions that should have been put on them 3 years ago.
I find it very frustrating when any leaders of the Western world now say, oh, we can have more sanctions. We should have already had, day one, you know, you put the first lot on. By day 10, we should have had, you know, the serious sanctions on. It's obscene that 3.5 years later there is still any way of doing it. And the secondary sanctions, absolutely, I've always said, India, pick a side, you know, pick a side. There is a punishment for choosing the wrong side. But this is the thing. Vladimir Putin needs a win. He can't just go creeping back and go, oh, OK, it's all been a horrible mistake. I'm not sure he's that keen on an awful lot of his fighting men coming back to say, you know, what they've gone through back to Russia as well. As you say, his economy is now just a complete war machine. Without that war machine, what happens to it? But we know that Donald Trump wants a win. He wants to be the man who brings peace. And if it's peace at any price, he's not bothered because he's not paying that price. What is a possible good news outcome, regardless of this meeting tomorrow, for this war? Is there any outcome to this war other than a complete victory for Russia or a complete victory for Ukraine?
I mean, if I was a betting man, clearly I want a Ukrainian victory, and I want us to have gone back in time and given Ukraine what they needed at the start and put the sanctions on at the start. But, you know, we can't play fantasy war. We've got to look at what the situation is today and what the possible outcomes are. And, you know, at the moment, this is a complete stalemate. Russia are making advances. Ukraine are struggling to hold the line in some areas. So at the moment, stopping that Russian offensive has to be the first objective for the Ukrainians. And then they need to look at what is a realistic outcome, and whether it's a frozen conflict where they try and negotiate in slow time with Russia to recover some of the territory lost. That's a likely outcome. Are they going to break through the Russian lines and sweep them back into Russia? Brutally speaking, no, they're not. So, but the important thing is here that this has to be acceptable to the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian president and their government, and it has to not be a win for Putin. And I think if we look at it in those terms, that will lead us towards an outcome that is the least worst.
And that's the key. Putin can't be allowed to claim a win because that he supports him, bigs himself up in front of the Russian people, and then he moves on to the next country. How concerned are the people of other countries, the Baltic states, particularly Poles? We know countries taking this very seriously about any win in Ukraine leading to a strike and assault on them.
Well, Poland have got themselves into the position where they are probably Europe's leading military power now, because they understand exactly what's on their border, and they know. They certainly have a kind of generational memory as to what happens when the Russians take over your country. So, they're very focused. And you speak to Ukrainian people on the streets here, and the majority I've spoken to are still. They don't see any other choice but to fight on it.
Well, this is interesting. We spoke to Steve Gill, an American former advisor in the White House, I like Steve Gill, but it was an awful lot. I could have read these Kremlin talking points on social media easily any day of the week. Basically saying, the Ukrainian people don't want the war to continue. They want a ceasefire. The Zelensky is just corrupt. He's carrying this on. He's making money from it, and that the people of the Donbass region, they're Russian, they want to be part of Russia. Can you tackle any or all of those issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Look, the Ukrainians have been on the wrong end of a very, very good information campaign in a very similar way to the way the Israelis have in Gaza, where the lie has taken hold on certain parts of the American electorate. That's where their information campaign was focused on. It was on MAGA. And it's been very effective.
To influence the White House, to influence policy on Ukraine.
Exactly so. And, you speak to people on the streets here. I mean, I haven't interviewed everyone. I haven't done my own polls, but I do have anecdotal evidence of a number of Ukrainians, most of whom are soldiers, who are really keen to fight on.
And they're the ones taking the brunt.
Exactly. And on the flip side, I've walked around the streets and I've seen the memorials, the seas of flags where people have died, and I've seen young men walking around on prosthetic limbs. So you can see the cost to Ukrainian society as well. And frankly, it makes me feel slightly humbled as a former British soldier, because I thought I'd fought in a war in Afghanistan, and now I realise that actually I didn't at all. And I this is on a completely different level to anything I could possibly have. This is a war. It's astonishing.
It's a war for survival, isn't it? And when I ask people, and they say, "Well, it's not our problem. Sign the deal, get a de facto deal, give away 20% of the territory." I always say, no. Well, so how much of our country would give away? Unfortunately, that often backfires. People start saying Norwich, Liverpool, London. 3 of the suggestions I've had every time. But it's a genuine question, isn't it? And the same to Americans. How much of your country and how many people will you've had died? Your young men, your women and children, will you've had died, raped, abducted? You go, yeah, absolutely fine. You can keep control of that area. I can't see us ever doing it, and yet people are expecting the Ukrainians to do that after the price they've already paid.
Yeah, not only give up their country, but also knowing that this is coming back further down the line.
How do we know that?
Into a bad deal. Because we know how Putin operates. We know what his ambitions are. He's been very, very clear about his desire to establish a Russian sphere of influence over old Soviet Union countries. We know there are Russian diaspora populations in the Baltics and certainly down in the Balkans as well. And we've seen this playbook over and over again since the turn of the century, where, look at Georgia, look at Ukraine, where Putin salami slices his way into these countries using powerful psychological operations on the native Russian populations to foment dissent, where he uses little green men over the border, which are, ununiformed Russian soldiers who are there to destabilize and act as an insurgency on the ground.
Plausible deniability, as it did in Crimea.
Yeah, and this is a playbook we've seen time and time again, and there's no indication whatsoever to suggest that Putin is going to stop with Ukraine.
Okay. Now, just checking, you're in Kyiv right now, in the capital city. Are you going to be heading closer to the front line at all while you're over in Ukraine?
Yes, I can't say exactly where for obvious reasons, but we're going quite a bit closer. We've got this car that I'm sitting in is full of humanitarian aid, so that's going to help civilian evacuations, and the vehicle itself is being donated to help civilian evacuations. So the poor old girl's probably got about 3 to 4 weeks of life left in her, judging by how often these vehicles get destroyed on the front line. So we're going to take that forward, and then we're going to go and speak to some of the forward troops as well.
Okay, well, I hope you stay safe and everyone with you stays safe, and we'll hope to speak to you again very, very soon. Secretary Fox, defence expert there for the Henry Jackson Society.